Oh, hey, what you doing?
Oh, I just finished planning my campaign.
Oh, awesome. What are your trade routes like? 'Cause I was wanting to,
Do you mind?
Ben!
Yeah.
I just came up with this great Tabaxi backstory. You're gonna love it.
Stop it! Ugh. Hey, Ben, did you hear? The new Unearthed Arcana came out. Double Strike Psionic Ranger. Crit struck without even trying.
awesome.
Well, I guess we're doing this live now. Stop touching me!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unqualified Experts. I'm your host, Braden Gardner.
Corrupt Overlord, Shane Dayton.
I'm your friendly neighborhood murder hobo, Nathan.
And I am Ben, Beelzebuddy.
The banner of the Psionic Double Strike Ranger, apparently.
Yeah,
Sadness.
I wonder why.
It's a mystery.
The giant boulder of a D20 says otherwise.
Mystery.
Where are the D20s, out of curiosity?
Out of your reach.
Oh god, I'm enraged.
Okay. So, we're fortunate to have Ben and Nathan here with us today. We're going to be borrowing their expertise to talk a little bit about a subject that everyone at the table has a lot of experience with, and that's putting together the nuts and bolts of an RPG campaign. The how-to for what can be a very, very daunting task if you get bogged down in the minutia very quickly. So, we'll kind of cover a few major areas for those who are looking to build their first RPG campaign. And if this is coming up on your 5th, 10th, or 20th, these are not bad tips to consider as well if you're looking for something to spice up your RPG a little bit. So I'll go ahead and throw it over to Nathan to start. What are your thoughts on important elements when you're building an RPG campaign?
Well, I wanted to talk about world building today. I mean, you guys have all played in at the very least my D&D campaign, and you know that I built an entire cosmology from the ground up and then set you loose in it. So, I would say that it's kind of my thing. I love doing it, and I want to spread that love to others.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, when it comes to the actual theory, there are two general variations of how someone builds a world. These are extremes. Everybody falls somewhere in between them. They are top-down and bottom-up building styles. Personally, I prefer the top-down style because what that is when you look at everything. It is the macro scale. You're building a world. You might work on climate systems and trade and cities and where all the kingdoms are on the map before you ever even get to figuring out what you want your party to be doing. The opposite of that is the bottom-up style, where you start with something that you know. You might start with a villain, or a general storyline, or even a city, and then you build the world out from there with that as the focal point. And in talking about these, it's important to recognize that when building a campaign, one of the things that you need to seriously consider is the scale. You can build an entire universe. You can build an entire multiverse, and it will take you years, and no one will ever see 99.999% of it. It helps to focus on what you need. So, for example, if you're doing a fairly standard, there's a bad guy, go on a quest to kill him, you might have a kingdom and a few kingdoms around it, And that's all that you really need to plan out. You don't need to necessarily know what's going on in the world outside of that. You can bring it down to a city where your players don't really have a reason to leave because everything that they know and love is there. If you want to get really weird, you could potentially bring it down to a single very large building. I don't know how you would do that, but I'm sure that somebody can find a way.
It's like
Challenge
Judge.
accepted.
It's like Judge Dredd.
Yeah, exactly.
Judge Dredd. The entire thing took place in a single, very large building.
Very much so.
I mean, if you want a dungeon adaptation of that, Undermountain would be another potential example of that.
That would be perfect. And I think that hits on something a bit, which is you don't need to plan everything.
Could not agree more.
Yep.
Like, if depending on what scale you're wanting to work at, obviously you need to build the things that are plot relevant. But you don't have to plan out an entire city if your players are only going to be there to talk to one guy. You also need to know what needs a set location. For example, a bad guy's main lair, that might need a set location so that the players know where they're going and how long it's going to take. But the bad guy's secondary bad guy, who's harassing them along the way, it doesn't necessarily matter where he's coming across them. You can shift things around as needed. And it's important to remember that until you say it, you can always go back and keep working on the backstory of your world. And this doesn't just apply to homebrews. You're going to be doing most of your world building if you run a homebrew. You can do anything, so you're going to want to figure out what you're doing. But even with established worlds, you're going to want to have a general lay of the land. Even if you're running a module, which is about as focused as these things can get, you're going to probably want to have some idea of what's going on in the general vicinity. And when it comes right down to it, your players are not going to want to stay in your sandbox every single time. Sometimes they will stick in that sandbox and they will absolutely refuse to move no matter what you do. They're just happy playing in the sand and throwing lizards around.
Or unhappy, and they still won't move.
Indeed. But sometimes they're going to break your boundaries. And you can deal with that by knowing just a little bit about everything. And what I mean by that, as an example, I'm currently running a 40k campaign with 2, soon to be 3, of the people at this table in it.
Woo!
In that campaign, I had them... The scale was a city, a very large city, but a city. And they had, due to shenanigans, the opportunity to essentially start anywhere in the city they want. And I had all these points of interest laid out, and I know all of these people who are going to be important to them, and they picked the one part of the city where I had nothing. Nothing. But I knew how this world worked. I knew what the people of the city were doing, and I knew that once they had a look around, and they went, "We're going to go there," I knew that the place that they had picked was a warehouse. I knew that it had a train line that served that warehouse, which gives me a setting, and I knew that it was occupied by enemy forces, which gives me some adversaries to throw against them. And because I wanted them to be interacting with regular everyday people, I decided that there were going to be some civilians there. It's a heavily armed world, so they picked up all the guns they could and just hid. And that was an excellent first encounter. Because even though it wasn't planned at all, they went in, they got to show off some of their stealthing skills, they got to talk to people, and they got to have a spectacular fight at the end, and I think that everybody can agree that that gave you guys a very nice baseline for how that world worked.
I will agree. It did work out fairly well. For example, we understand that Braden should not roll dice, ever.
Look, that's the beauty of flamers. You don't have to. You just point and shoot.
Very much so. So, in general, when you're doing world building, I've found that it's best to build what you need to build, but know just enough about everything that you can, if you need to, build up from nothing.
Give yourself some flexibility.
Yeah.
Indeed. There's nothing that is inherently unimportant. Everything can be interesting, even if you don't have anything there yet.
And I'll second the part about knowing your world. So I know in the 4-year kind of custom campaign I ran for a bunch of the guys, there were times like, okay, the overarching theme was magic was broken, chaos especially, luck was broken, so the chaos god who went rogue. And so it was like, okay, well, I have these cities on the map. How would I deal with a world like that? Well, one group just celebrates. We're all going to die tomorrow. Let's just celebrate the random stuff once a year and just party out. Another place tries to open a rift and bring in all these Modrons to try to impose order. You guys missed that city. Which is a shame.
That is a
I would love to see your Tabaxi go nuts in that one. But, it wasn't necessarily, this is the Chaos City, this is the Modron City, this is the Elven City. I had the ability of like, okay, here's 3 or 4 different cities, and depending on where the party goes, what the mood is at the time, what challenges they can handle, or in one case, like, okay, they had a really rough 3 sessions in a row. Like, okay, I'm giving them the Mardi Gras and Chaos Magic. We'll put them in the city where everyone just celebrates and they can have a good time and just play Scooby-Doo and Goop Ball for a session. And having the ability where it's not, no, this city must be the city where this conflict is taking place, but just knowing where different things are going on, you can just switch it depending on what the mood is. And I think that's really effective.
Mm-hmm. Flexibility is indeed key when it comes to running a campaign in anything, whether or not you're doing it on the macro scale. Like you said, you built your own world, you've got this whole big bad cosmic thing going on, you're trying to stop it, or you're running a module and the whole thing's taking place in a tiny little village, and all of a sudden you've been shrunk down to the size of mice and you have to figure out a way to get yourself big. And the main enemy's a cat.
Actually sounds like a great one shot.
Yeah.
That was Dingo Doodles. Dingo Doodles Christmas special.
Oh.
So shout out to Dingo and the other ones that were in there. I think it was
we will find the YouTube link for
Z.
that in the description.
Yeah, I think it was Z and Puffin Forest as well that were in that one shot. It was really good. They also did a Halloween one, which was absolutely hilarious as well.
Hey, now that I've learned this information, I'll not be helping you with chores tonight. I have something to do.
Well, then I guess the chores aren't getting done. How are they?
Agreed.
But I don't know if you had anything else to go over.
I think there's just one thing that does tie into what I know you're doing, and that is that you're not necessarily just building a sandbox or a playground for your players. It can be very difficult to do it well, but what you're trying to do is to create something that's similar to a living world.
Mm-hmm.
So the place where that manifests the most, I think, is with the people in it and what they know about what's going on, how they interact with the characters, and how that can change things over a much longer span of time, even if the characters don't know about it.
Mm-hmm. Your world's evolving, and as the player characters go through and change things, different things happen. Different things shift in the world. Power balance could go ahead and go out of whack. Let's say you guys roll in, you kill an evil king who's been running this place for a while. All of a sudden, now you have a power vacuum, and a couple things can happen. You could have a new king rise, like his son, who's even more of a bastard than the first guy. You could have a new king rise who turns out to be a good guy, or all of a sudden you could have a massive civil war where people from outside of the kingdom are coming in to take pieces of it.
Or local warlords. You have so many options of how does this play out when you have that power.
Exactly, and that all comes down to your flexibility. Now, when you start looking at the way that I like to run my campaigns and session by session is I like to, when I do have the ability to plan them out, because half the time I end up having to just completely pull something out of my ass because somebody has gone ahead and gone, I know we have the bright cheery path, but the dark foreboding path looks like it has better treasure. Let's go that way. Okay. Guess we're doing this live now.
You know what? I don't like darkness anymore. I'm just gonna plane shift the entire party into hell. We're gonna have a hell party. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, that was actually a thing. That was actually a thing once. Oh dear God. But the way I like to run it is I like to use what I call the skeletal system. You have the head bone, which is how it all starts. What's your tie-in for getting everybody interested and involved? And this works really well for the campaign. You know, what's the big thing that they have to deal with? What's the problem? And then you have certain key points in the campaign, which no matter which way you go, you utilize flexibility and improvisation, which is going to be the second topic I go over, to bring them back to that point. So they could go all the way out. So, all right, let's say that we have to go from New York, then we have to go to Chicago, then we have to go to Denver, and then we have to get to LA. You could start in New York, go all the way up into Canada, but you can still manage to wind them back to Chicago. Then they dip all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico because somebody wants to go deep sea fishing. Shane.
Always.
Then you bring it back up to Denver. It doesn't matter how it goes, but you have your reason why they're doing it, you have your key points, and then you have your end. How are you going to finish it? What's the final confrontation? What's the big bad going to be? What's going to happen there? Everything that happens in between is your players fleshing out the story for you. And utilizing world building is an excellent way to allow your players to have that level of freedom. Give them that flexibility to do what they want. Because if you have built your world or studied your world well enough, depending on if it's a pre-made one or one that you've made yourself, it gives you the ability to know how the people and the environment in your world is going to react to the shenanigans that your players get up to. Because let's be honest here, you give your players the choice between the left door and the right door. Somebody is going to blow a hole in the middle and walk straight through.
The other player rolls a d20 searching for a hidden door.
Exactly. Always assume that if you give them two options, they will choose option 3.
Option 3 is Mordor.
Or there's a shiny ring there that'll help us sneak past things. It'll be great.
I'm sure.
Except for the one big eye. The one big eye can see you all the time.
Yeah, but what if we use him to see the things that are trying to see us?
We could put him in a bottle and just carry him around, and whenever he starts looking at us, just flick the bottle a couple of times. It'll be fine.
The telescope of Sauron.
So you can get an idea of how quickly our campaigns tend to go off the rails. So improv is important.
That little bit right there. Perfect example. Now, with that skeleton bit, you go off of that and you use the flexibility, your knowledge of your world, how you're going to react to people doing stupid shit. Like using the Mordor example, they take the ring and somehow through some miraculous roll of natural 20s, in this point I'm blaming our resident murder hobo, they managed to trap Sauron in a jar and turn him into a telescope.
It's okay, the rest of my rolls were all nat ones. Except for those.
The ones that mattered got to where we needed to be.
Exactly.
But, that sort of improvisation, you have to reward your players for doing well. At the same time, you also have to punish your players for not doing well. So those ones, congratulations, you now have a Sauron in a bottle, but you also have the entirety of all of the Uruks and Mordor chasing after you. And by the way, they don't need to sleep. Neither do the Nazgul. So, good luck, Murder Hobo. And friends.
It's okay, they'll all die first.
Probably.
Loosely related associate, thank you.
Kill it.
But using those things to be able to improv your way out of those situations. That way you don't have to halt the campaign And because you've built yourself a box that you just can't get out of. A good example of that is I was in a campaign some years ago where they had built themselves a box and they had the whole thing planned out. But the game ended 4 or 5 sessions into the campaign because we talked to the bad guy instead of just kill him. Because originally we were supposed to kill him, that was supposed to start a civil war, and then we got involved in that. We talked to him, and in 10 minutes of conversation, solved all the problems. Campaign was over. He had nowhere to go. And this was supposed to be a year-long campaign that we ended on day 4. Another example of like the players choosing option 3. I hate this story. I really do. I hate this story. I spent 3 days. I was running a Werewolf the Apocalypse campaign, which is an old World of Darkness game. I spent 3 days designing a 4-story building. It was mapped out on graph paper. I had it looking pretty. I had all of the enemies stationed where they were going to be standing, how the players should move through it. I had all of the minions statted. I had the big bad evil guy at the top of the tower statted. Now keep in mind, this is like modern day things. And I said, okay, you guys have to go take out this nest of bad vampires. What are you going to do? The very first response I got was, we're going to go skydiving. I said, okay, we'll go with that, because you gotta roll with the punches on this one. And they said, all right, we get there. All right, so now what? This airport doesn't have skydiving available, but do they have planes? Yes. We buy one. Specifically, he buys one. They point to the rich glasswalker that was with them. I looked at him and I said, how much money do you actually have? He told me. The only thing I could do was just shake my head and go, okay, you buy a plane. But you can't fly it. Actually, we can. Who? This guy. All right. So you bought the plane and you're flying the plane. What do? We fly over that section of the city that you said the building was in. Okay. Now what? How high are we? 3,000 feet. Good. Why? We open the side door. Use a bunch of magical gifts on one person. Long story short, he got super big. His soak pool, hextupled. He jumped out of the plane, used his ability to go supersonic, and just for fun, tucked himself into a cannonball, lit himself on fire, and his battle cry was, "We am a meteor," as he just bombs the building I spent 3 days building. 3 days.
I've never yet seen a player pull the rocks fall, everyone dies on the GM before.
He did.
But
He did. And he survived. I hated him for it. Because he survived and destroyed 3 days of work by jumping out of a plane and going, "We am a meteor."
Well, it's so good you could not deny that setup after they hit all the rolls and skills.
Oh, no. They succeeded on everything. And I had to improv my way out of it and be flexible with the players. Yep. That's an excellent story. It's an excellent example of utilizing that sort of thing. I had world building, and the amount of damage that he did destroyed a city block.
Yeah.
Legit. He crawled his way out of the crater and went, "I got him." Just flopped over. But kind of shifting gears a bit, giving your NPCs a certain flavor when it comes to improvisation, I think is important.
Yeah.
Because like, not everybody is good at doing accents. You can't have everybody just coming around and talking like this. And then the next person comes in and they start speaking like this. And then, of course, you got the one guy, he's always out there talking like that. You know, you don't have to do accents. You can just change your pitch a little bit. Go up higher if you're speaking for a female person. Let's say you're talking to the blacksmith. Drop your voice down. Let's say you're talking to an excitable wizard. The excitable wizard, all you really have to do is just go ahead and speed up how fast you're talking. I mean, just doing simple things like that. Changing your pitch, changing your tone. I mean, you can even go ahead and have yourself a nasally voice if you're talking to the Chamberlain of the King and he's supposed to be the prick that everybody hates. Talk like that. Just simple voice changes like that can really bring a depth of flavor and feeling to the characters and to your world. And it really helps drive home the fact that these aren't just the players talking to the DM. The players, their characters, are talking to someone else. They're really talking to a person.
And I think a really good point to add to that is, even if you cannot do voices nearly that well, and I will speak for myself, I cannot come close to that, you don't have to keep it up for a whole campaign to have the effect. If the first time they meet a character, there's just 2 or 3 good lines, even a bad accent that's clearly, terrible Scottish or terrible Irish, which are my 2 favorite accents, because I'm bad at both, but you get what I'm trying to do, and that kind of inflection will just stick with the character's heads as they're talking. My favorite boomerang I threw them was they were coming to a city of dwarfs, so they're expecting a bad Scottish accent. And instead, the day before, I looked up a bunch of Australian slang. And so they showed up the dwarfs. Good day, mate. You just in for the Never Never? You're just in time for the Barbie. A special guest or something? And it was like, And once in a while, I would just throw a mate or a bud, and that's all I had to do. Because at that point, the Australian was so stuck in their head that I didn't have to keep up the accent through every interaction. They had gotten the painted scene. They felt like they were interacting with a different group, and you could just see that click.
It's a wonderful way to go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
It really, really is.
And even if you do it badly, your players will appreciate it, because it adds a little bit extra. And look, if you do voices badly, I will still go all in on it.
Now, the last point that I'm going to go ahead and make on this is using improvisation, flexibility. The entire point is to make the players be the central characters. Because there's nothing quite as frustrating for a player. You go in to talk to the king, and then you have 4 dukes come in, and the DM is sitting there talking to themselves. The players are sitting on the side going, well, I'm glad I got that 1 out of the way. Crap. Wish I could have kept that 20. You're sitting there on the sidelines not doing anything because you have literally been sidelined by story. Now, there are certain cutscene elements where you can go ahead and do certain things where, the players and the characters kind of have to take a back line, but that's in part of the skeleton bit. And it doesn't last the whole session. Yeah. It's like maybe 3 to 5 minutes of cutscene of, hey, this is what you're getting into, go.
And there are interesting ways to do that. You can have them walking up on something, and that's just been going on in the background. You can have them do a short stealth section where they are actively listening in on this. You can have them watch a video that was hidden on a hard drive that they had to hack into. You can make these things rewards for them.
Yeah.
Exactly. Something else, there's one other thing that I'm going to go ahead and mention really quick, and that is random encounters. They are the joy of some DMs and the bane of others. And when you start having like 3 or 4 random encounters a session, it's really hard to go ahead and continue your plot rolling forward.
Yeah.
So, going off of what you said there, which actually reminded me of this, because it's something that I did in my D&D campaign. I designed a bunch of non-combat oriented encounters. And I'd have players roll to see if they had one. And then I would surreptitiously roll to see where I came up. One of the first ones that came up was a village. They walked into the village. They got a place to sleep for the night. It was comfortable. They ate well. They woke up in the morning. Village wasn't there.
I remember that village. I didn't like that village.
That village did me a concern.
It
and
was a
then
mystery.
I got shot by one of my party mates,
Yes.
alerting them to the concern.
Not only was it a mystery, it was a mystery that provoked inter-party conflict.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
But just simple things like that. I mean, like, the whole concept of it was every time this mage went to sleep, the village popped up. When he woke up, it went away. That's all it was. But he got shot. He got shot. Everybody was concerned. There was another one where there was a merchant that you could go ahead and encounter, and you could do business with the merchant. Another villages are probably the easiest ones to find and get to. One was a halfling caravan that you guys could have encountered. You never did, but things are where they are. There was a village where there were no children.
Oh yeah, I hated that one too.
Yeah. Yeah.
The village of no children at all.
Actually found out what was going on with that one. It got worse, and no, the kids weren't dead. It was weird.
Mm-hmm. But it was just a cultural norm for the area. I gave the party the option, do you want to investigate this? They went, hell no, and skedaddled the opposite direction.
It should be noted, that's doing that sort of thing, like presenting them extremely ominous mysteries, depending on who you're running for, that could be a great way to actually get them back on the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because some people will dive into that and go super hard into that. And frankly, I think normally the group that we run with would. But in that particular campaign, with those particular characters, that was a great way to tell us, well, not to tell us anything, but to make us go, okay, no, we're going straight there. Fuck that! No, we're gonna go talk to the king now.
Utilizing your flexibility and the DM's options of, guess what? You also have multiple choices. The players aren't just going to screw up your plans. You can screw up player plans. Throw something like that in there. Surreptitiously get them back on track.
And that's one of the most important points to remember when you're building an RPG and actually running a campaign, is that you're part of a collective storytelling experience, and the collective part is the easier of those two words to overlook.
It is critical.
Everybody should have some responsibility for how the story is told. Like you mentioned before, you want to plan out just the most basic skeleton. You want a beginning, you want key plot points that need to be hit, you want key NPCs, and then an end game. You have those four things, you can build the rest as you go along. And part of the collective storytelling experience is making sure that a player's choices matter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to have too many conversations amongst your own NPCs, because that's just you making choices on your own, basically, without involving the table.
Like the We Am a Meteor story. Perfect
Yes.
example.
And it's really important to make sure that everybody is not only making sure that their choices matter, that you are building out consequences, positive or negative, to those choices to kind of progress the story that isn't necessarily the story in your idealized form as a DM, but the story that the table as a collective is telling. And this is one of the most common mistakes early DMs make, is basically romanticizing the story that they, the DM, want to tell, and the players are but their puppets in this masquerade that is being put together. No, that's not how this works.
That's the
Everybody's
fastest-
part of it.
That's the fastest way to burn down the ball.
Yeah.
It really is. And part of making sure that players are involved in the collective storytelling aspect of D&D is getting them hooked from the beginning by making them put together a backstory. Now, I don't think that a backstory has to be a novel. If you put together a few paragraphs, like a page at maybe 2 at most, that's usually enough room for a PC to put down who they are, where they came from, what they're hoping to get out of life, potential enemies that they've made up to the point that they're joining the party.
What dumpster fires are you bringing with you to the campaign
Mhm.
instead of the ones you're getting handed?
Honestly, I'm just remembering your Dresden Files campaign right now, where basically we got a few problems from our backstories, and then you gave us a setup to a mystery, and then we ripped up the rails, planted them in the sky, and then set the world on fire, basically by accident. Did your story even really come in for the most part after that? Because it really didn't feel like it.
Very
It felt like we were getting
loosely.
hit by
Yeah.
our own fires.
Yeah.
Most of it was you getting burned by your own fires. Like, the way that our campaigns typically run for our Saturday group is that we have 12 sessions to tell a story, basically. And we got to session 10, and I'm sitting here looking at 75% of the story that hasn't been explored in a campaign that I expected to take roughly a month in game time, and we've gotten through
Thursday.
we started on Sunday and we got to Thursday, and then I'm just sitting here going, okay, well, the story is completely going off the rails at this point.
And how?
So we're just gonna go with seeing if we can achieve a resolution, which ties into the flexibility thing. Is I've still got a big chunk of story I can tell in another campaign because we've made our own story, taken it so far off of the mortal plane that we're just sitting here going, okay, well, I have one person consorting with outsiders, and I have an inner city conflict between the winter and summer courts that's about to explode because of the choices of two other people.
Don't look at me.
And then we have the investigator who's been swept up along for the ride and has somehow wound up being BFFs with the person he started the campaign loathing.
The anarchist.
And we ended up telling an amazing story
Yeah.
by the end. It was emotionally draining as a DM to tell that story because there was a lot going on and everybody was so invested in what they were doing, and it came together really well, but without making the player decisions matter and having the aforementioned flexibility, plus the backstories that started fueling some of this, we would never have gotten to that point. And while I know that sometimes getting players even invested in a campaign can be tricky, I do mandate backstories largely because of a lesson that I learned when I was in college. I was running a one-shot where basically we had a bunch of high-level characters that I'd compiled from other campaigns I was in, and I was going to have them basically band together and go save the world again, because something bad enough, the gods were like, no, we're just going to send a bunch of super champions to deal with this because we can't directly intervene. But getting the players to actually go in, because I just handed out character sheets because it was a one-shot, the lesson that stuck with me was one of the players at the table, basically, when he was approached for recruitment, the question that kept coming up was, why should I do this? I already saved the world. I've earned my happy ending. Why are you bothering me with this? Why should I join and do more of your dirty work? And, young early 20s me was annoyed that the player was being obstinate, but the actual lesson being conveyed there, because seasoned gamer who was at the table at that point, which I hadn't necessarily put two and two together on at the time, but it's one of the most important lessons I took away, was you should just be asking, why should X person be motivated to do Y thing? And while it's very easy as the DM to do that for any character that's not a PC, the moment you start trying to force home the why on a PC, you then are railroading them and taking away their agency.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a backstory, you've already got some pre-built actions and hooks to get them engaged and make their decisions matter from the get-go. So story is one of the most important binding elements so long as you don't get bogged down in every detail from the start.
If you start reading a backstory and it starts with, once upon a time, I was born on a rainy night in the middle of on a Thursday. No.
So the general rule of thumb, and this goes for backstories too, paint the broad strokes, plan the rest as you go.
Yeah.
Everybody will be much happier.
I do think that another thing that should be noted about backstories is that your players will help you put them in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, players like having their backstory stuff come out and get dealt with or screw them over. They'll help you. They want to do that, and it'll get them that much more invested.
It's also kind of a nice little hack for world building as a whole,
Yeah.
because if they give you a bunch of details, that's a huge part of the world you're not responsible for building anymore. They've done it for you.
Well, like an example was the D&D campaign I ran. Homebrew world, whatnot. There were these two cities, Marth and Larian, they were at war. One of the party members was a runaway princess from Larian. So I had 2 sessions of my campaign done for me, because they had to go to Larian. Spooky towns and such, making them get there faster. But 2 sessions were done. I got to use that to build that for me. And then at the end, I got to use that to fuck over the party. It was great.
Not only that, but that kind of became that character's motivation for a lot of what happened afterward.
Yep.
It worked out really well. I really dig that. But now that we've got basically the world, how to interact with it, and the driving forces that are keeping the train moving, not necessarily on the tracks.
Almost never on the tracks.
Well,
Going
that's
forward.
actually a great lead-in for what sorts of obstacles you want to put in front of them. I know Ben touched on this a little bit with random encounters, but Shane, how would you balance that?
Yeah, I am big on customizing encounters, and that's not just figuring out the right reason, the right set of enemies for a party to meet, but I do a lot of custom enemies, custom world building, especially, borrowing a video game term, custom bosses. And a lot of this is going to apply especially to 5e, because that's why I have the most experience DMing, but the concepts apply to any campaign you're running. A specific note to 5e, if you're a new DM, the challenge rating is wrong. It is wrong, it is wrong, it is wrong, and you are going to either murder your party or your campaign will get murdered. It'll be one or the other.
Yeah, there really is no leeway on that. They're either you go down to pet something and you squish it, or you go down to pet something and it squish you.
I've had a CR 5 enemy take down half of a level 13 party.
Was that a roper?
No, but I will mention them. But that was a banshee.
Uh-huh.
And then ropers will just mess up a party. Their thing. You have to look at the enemies and the skills because they do the general math, but averages just they don't work in certain situations in enemies. And I've seen others where okay, according to this book, this ancient dragon should wipe them out. And they did so much damage in round 1 as a level 12 party, they killed the dragon. They're oh, well, yeah, if there's one enemy. Well, that sucks. And some things to keep in mind with that, the book is built for 4 people for 5e, for the average party. Now, whatever game system you're in, you want to know if the enemies are specifically designed for a party of a certain size. Because in 5e, 5 players are not 25% stronger than a 4-player party. Because the extra moves, the extra movement, especially when you get to higher levels with double attack or spells and something, they're 100% more effective. If you have a 6-player party with experienced players, that party is infinitely more dangerous than a 4-person party, even at low levels, much less once you get to middle and high stuff. And so you have to keep that in mind when you're playing with them. Now, that being said, sometimes your players make a stupid decision. Like, we have 6 players here. Okay, who's the healer? Oh, we have a paladin. Doesn't he not get lay on hands until level 2? Cool. There's 6 level 1 players and no healer. Don't throw an enemy that's going to deal a lot of damage that needs healing. Like, you do have to adjust to what you see.
Or do punish them.
Yeah.
Don't punish the poor paladin. The paladin's just doing his best. It's not his fault he was the tank and the utility caster and the cleric
Oh, he's not punishing the paladin. He's punishing everybody else.
and a frontline fighter.
And in that case, it makes sense. And part of that's just reading the table, because so much of doing the encounters is knowing who your table is and how experienced players are. If they're inexperienced, then you want to go kind of light early on, kind of test out what they do well, what they figured out. If you have a level 3 player who uses this weird combination of 2 spells, so his spellcaster has an AC of 20, you know what? Go ahead. Let's see how they handle an ogre. That is an appropriate response to that type of party. And a lot of what I like is, I tend to do a lot with the middle level parties. When you get to 10, 12, there's nothing in the book that individually is going to give a huge challenge to a party. On some of the support books, you'll have an enemy that will TPK a party of 10th level. And you get enemies that say they're challenging, and then, oh, they didn't even get through round 1 and the Death Knight's dead. Wow.
And all of these, of course, are exactly the same CR.
Exactly. And so a lot of that is you'll have to pay attention to what the party's doing and figure things out. For the way I ramp that up, if it seems like the encounters are getting a bit too easy, just go straight to maximum hit points for every enemy. Like, most will have a range. If they can handle everything at max hit points, you're probably good to mess around and try some things out. I ended up doing max plus 25 because that was just a good amount. And sometimes an enemy would survive to round 2 because they had this amazing ability to leave an enemy with 1 hit point left. It became a running gag for 40 years because it happened so often. If I'm going to custom something, and this is where I have a lot of fun, because I love the open world, the different bosses, the fun thing about it is, what's your intention? Like, if you're going to run to a level 20 campaign, do you want a level 10 boss who has a good chance of smiting all of them? That's not necessarily what you're going for, because you have a 50-50 chance of just ending the campaign early. Now, choices have to have consequences and such. But at the same time, you know, at a level 18, well, yeah, at that point you're doing do or die. But like, 2 examples are, one, go with a boss or a villain who has the ability to think, because when you have a whole campaign party, well, if they're going after a level 14 wizard, you don't become a level 14 wizard without having people come after you, especially if you're a bad guy. Set some traps, have some agents. Use those illusion spells that players overlook because they don't do damage, but man, you can mess with a party if you have the right ones. There's, planting false memories. That's a brilliant one to mess up with a party. And so there's this really cool stuff when you have a character who can react to what they're doing, whether it's pursuit or, oh, you came after me twice. My guards aren't mindless and not paying attention when you drop in. They know someone's coming. You can create some really interesting setups or scenarios, like, why are we wanted in this town we've never been to? Oh, because the wizard can illusion stab someone in broad daylight with your paladin's face on. Whoops.
No, that'll do it.
And so there's cool ways to do that. For actual bosses, 2 that I made that I really enjoyed, they sort of different purpose. One was the giant scarecrow, when you guys ran to the blood god sacrifice. They were mid-level 14, they had strong tanks, strong casters. There was nothing I could make at that point that would legitimately challenge them in a fight. But since we're running 8-hour sessions, 4 straight weekends of 8-hour sessions without a fight is a bit much for DM and for players, no matter how much they love a campaign. So the fun part about the Scarecrow was, okay, you have a wizard, you have a sorcerer, everybody has fireball, min-maxed. There's no way that boss is going to beat them. So I just made him strange. Like the first thing they did, I'm casting this on him. He uses a legendary save. And that gets easier. It's like, oh, wait. This is a legendary custom. That's a problem. And so even if it really isn't, they don't know that. And so it actually puts them back invested, because they've been waltzing through fights, but now they're not quite sure what they're up against. This thing can just deflect off their magic. The other was I gave this thing an insane amount of hit points. It was like 1,000 because it's still a scarecrow, which means fireballs do double damage, and I want him to live more than 2 rounds. So I knew the party. I just added that into the balance. Look, the cleric's gonna throw a fire. The sorcerer's gonna throw a fire. The thing's gonna take fire damage from being on fire. Let's just give it 1,000 hit points. They will kill it fast enough. Because of the setup, there were like sacrificial scarecrows around it. I also gave him like a legendary action, and I called it the Feast of Crows. And so you're like, what is that? And that's kind of a neat little thing. So you give it a cool name, you give it a vivid description. Well, from its sleeves, there are seemingly hundreds or thousands of crows coming in a giant swarm over your party. Everyone roll me a Constitution save, Dex save. And so you'd have things like, okay, well, you failed that one, you're blind. You failed this one, this is the effect, you start yourself feeling ill. This one, oh, you definitely broke that concentration check. You know, your magic guys around you are gone. And the damage is relatively little. And I throw in a tail, like, okay, the small amount of damage they did, you see your blood floating in air back towards the scarecrow. It was only like 10 points of healing, but that image freaked them the F out. Wait, it's taking our blood. Yes, kill it. And so it's this great boss fight because they were going to trash it. There's a point at that mid 12 to 13 where it's really hard to challenge the party without TPKing them until you get to a certain point. And so I gave them something very different, had these really unusual aesthetics, and it let them show off. And since the problems they were getting were ones they weren't used to, like how do you deal with a masked pro attack? We don't even know if they're pros. Why is it taking our blood? It's just a legendary save. It made them do a different type of fight other than the brute force. They had to think, they planned, hey, the sorcerer instead of blasting is going to do the meta magic fireball to burn all the crows around them, at which point they found, oh, they're straw crows doing damage. That's kind of neat and weird and terrifying. And so it was this really cool fight sequence everyone really enjoyed. And again, I could have made like a giant ogre, but that would just been another monster, just another fight. This was one to make this part of the world come to life. And then they still got to show off and do their thing, and I got to see how the party would do in a different fight. So as DM, I also had the ability like, oh, this one thing kind of threw them off a bit in a future boss fight where I want the stakes to be high. That's an interesting thing to keep in my mind, because I know the party can handle A, B, C, and D in their sleep, but man, E and F really threw them off for that. And so it's a good thing to keep in mind, because I even told in that campaign, you're facing a chaos god. You may lose at the end. You have to beat the god. On the other side, for one where it was high stakes, they had a prophecy to find the crown off the barbarian king, and they had this prophecy for 2.5 years in campaign, like in real life, before they found him in campaign. So that was like, okay, you guys are level 17. You went to a cursed continent. You are fighting one of the minions of the big, big bad. You have to earn this one. And so in that one, they had like a cleric with AC 27. They had a wizard with AC 27. They had casters. So I had seen from past fights, they knew how to handle themselves. And like, okay, in that one, there's a barbarian king. He was a level 14 stat barbarian, bear totem, so he could take all the damage you could throw at him.
Yep.
He had all the hit points. Oh yeah, and his evil sword did 4d12 damage, which the cleric, Eric, you know you were, was way too cocky after the past 4 months. First hit, crit. He does 61 damage. What? Guys, this is a real fight. And
Help.
but I mean, it's just like, okay, well, I need a little pure melee. They were going to go through any group, no matter how many barbarians. So there were a couple bards in the background. There were a couple of low-level casters. And so, you know, when he's sitting there with the barbarian king, and suddenly the bards sing, and there's 2 T-Rexes, he's like, he just turns like, kill the fancy pants, kill the fancy pants. He was aware if they paid attention and were smart as a party, okay, kill the bards because they are way too much of a wild card in a big battle. Kill the pet basilisks because they're probably making all their con saves, but if they don't, I turn into stone. And losing one guy in a party where there's 20 different enemies fighting is a big problem. Because suddenly those extra moves and power grid you have is gone, especially if it's your caster falling out of air or something. Then there were fires barbarians who were just more or less bodies, but enough of them to do damage.
Yeah.
And there were a couple rangers who they picked out pretty quickly. And they were smart. They took out the bards immediately, then the ranger, then the one T-Rex who managed to stay up, and then eventually they closed on the barbarian king, but the cleric actually got dropped into unconsciousness the only time that campaign. Which, by that time, they closed in, but freaked them out because I had never gotten with 120 points of dropping him before. The wizard dropped for only the first time in that campaign. And it's one of those where they had the healing, they had the save throws. But it's the first time in quite a while they actually felt the, oh crap, we can actually lose something. There's something on the line here. And for balancing, there it was simply, I had tested them enough that I knew, okay, melee, they can handle anything. Just because they had so many tools to work with. Throw in a little bit of magic, but not like a level 14 wizard who can wipe out a party. Throw out that wild card, which is the basilisk, because none of them failed to throw, but it would have been really interesting if the cleric went to stone early on in the fight. That would have changed dynamics really quickly. You will have had a chance to get him back, because the barbarian king was arrogant, and what we used him as this drinking horn and statue. He would just been sitting there holding. But it paints a very different type of encounter where you have to think, okay, where's my party at in the campaign? How much have I tested them? And then what can they handle versus what they can't?
Going on customized enemies, that's an excellent way to go ahead and give them the threat that they're missing from anything in the book. Because, like you said, CR is bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, one of the things that's probably some of the most fun to do and to encounter as both a DM and a player is to make something strange that nobody's ever seen before. Case in point, Murder Hobo's D&D campaign. He made these horrific aberrations called hantalopes.
Oh, those are great.
If you're a fan of Unqualified Experts, you will have heard them mentioned back in season 1.
Basically, entire face and antlers made out of arms and hands, and they move around, and they can grapple, and they want to rip your arms off and add them to their own. Creepiest goddamn things out there. Plus, they had barbed tongues and serrated hooves and shit like that.
Absolutely love them.
Fucking creepy ass shit.
But fortunately for the bard, not charismatic.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I got to level 20.
But you had those things in my campaign. It was getting to the point where I couldn't really do anything because they'd hit that point, like you said. So they were fighting a necromancer. So what I ended up doing was they encountered 3 level 3 necromancers. Oh boy, party's level 14. That's a joke, right? Yeah, it's a joke. They murdered him. What ended up happening? One of them had a wraith, literally claw its way out of the corpse. And just getting really visceral with your explanations and descriptions can really paint the picture and get your party going, this wraith clawed its way out. And the thing that I had set it up for the wraith had normal wraith rules, but I took away its ability to attack. What I gave it was the ability to occupy a player's space. Every time it occupied a player's space, or any living creature space, it got to automatically make a possession attempt.
Oh, nice.
If you succeeded, it got shoved back to an unoccupied square. But on its next turn, it could do it again. And anytime something died in its vicinity, it had the Wraith ability to summon Wraith.
Yeah.
So their whole shtick was, let's say the party brought in a whole bunch of guards. They'd possess the guards, make the guards attack everybody else, the other guards, the party. You'd have to kill them. They'd die. The original possessing Wraith would leave, spawn another Wraith. All of a sudden, you have a plague of these Wraiths running around. That sort of thing. Yeah, no, you can't. It can't damage you itself, but just because it can't damage you doesn't mean it isn't a threat.
Exactly. And I will put kind of one minor caveat here is it's very easy to accidentally metagame to some extent, especially if you have kind of a min-maxer in the party. But what I like to do in that case is suppose you're going after a wizard, a demigod, some ability, being that has the ability to think. In round 1 of that barbarian fight, the barbarians charge the wizard because there's a guy in robes. We can cut him up. And what was his class again?
War Mage?
Yeah. It was one where you could be a wizard and have an AC 27,
War Mage.
which is what he pulled off. And so the barbarians charged the rogue guy. It's like I know as DM they're not going to hit him, but they don't. And so in round 1, I have them charge, attack, and realize, oh crap, there's something weird going on here. In round 2, they broke off and tried different strategies. They tried grappling or they tried doing other things.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a nice compromise. He got to use his skills the way he built his character, is they don't know the wizard's the armor guy. But the moment they realize, oh crap, something's happening, they're not just dumb minions who keep trying to hit with stick. They're like, oh, maybe you grab him in a bear hug, and then maybe I can hit him, or maybe I'll go after the floating guy shooting fireballs instead.
Yeah.
And they adapt accordingly to what you've actually shown them in the fight. And so that's a way where, especially in round 1, let them do their BS, especially if you haven't encountered. If you have, round 2 and 3, that's where you show your villain is learned.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that minor adjustment it satiates the player's need to build something and show off. And it helps you still give them a challenge without that metagaming problem. Because when someone does it blatantly, whether you're DM or player, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
It really is like, oh, so I built this cool guy who this NPC has never met, but he knows how to counter me perfectly. That's not fun for anyone. That's not a feel-good time.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the core thing, and that's that players' decisions have to matter.
Yep, absolutely.
And that goes for the build, too.
Yeah.
I think it should also be noted that doing that sort of thing is an excellent way not just to give them those decisions, but to make some of the most memorable moments of your campaign.
Yeah.
Because if they can't just run in and smack something, like you said, they're going to try all sorts of stuff. Who knows? They might try fireballing the ceiling to see if they can get the cavern to collapse on him. They might try to control water and cause a flood. They might just decide, screw it, and just cast Earthquake a bunch of times to destroy the area you're standing on because it's better than fighting the dude. There's all sorts of things that players can do that they don't explore if they don't have to.
Yeah. One that got me was the cleric there taught me a valuable lesson. If you build a nation like Sparta of melee guys who don't believe in magic, make sure there are no plants around. Because he showed up to these Spartans who were crushing the town militia. He's like, plant growth, they have 1/4 movement. And so they're slowly moving, they just picking them off. No, tell them to get the ballistas, they have time. Plant growth, keep backing up. And a 1/4 movement for a heavy armor fighter, they just picked them off at that point. There was nothing I could do. It was like, I specifically said they don't believe in magic. Well done. The phalanx is broken. What can I do?
Fast forward past this at this point, as the last 4 rounds have shown that the casters are just going to keep sitting back and throwing firebolts and Eldritch Blast.
That's literally like, I'm just going to give you guys your experience and your loot because we all see where this is going. Yeah, because one of them was starting to break free. Eldritch Blast, shove them.
Back 10 feet into the plants.
You know what? The fight's over. We all know where this is going.
And sometimes as a DM, you have to be willing to throw in the towel.
Yeah. Sometimes they got you.
Yeah, sometimes your players legit just got you good. And you just toss your towel into the ring and be like, boom.
And those are some of the best
Good
stories out
job.
there. Yeah. But you have to let them happen.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, for me, one example was the party was level 7. And I had a Death Knight be their big bad. They had to figure out how to deal with this Death Knight. The party's decision at level 7. Now keep in mind, if they went toe-to-toe with this guy, they would not have survived. Their decision was to start an avalanche and drop a mountain on him.
Good decision.
It was.
They succeeded. They succeeded.
Yeah.
I mean, they did it on that one. Second time they saw him, he was on a ship, trying to catch up to him. They set up a thing where all of his masts broke off. He's still going because he had a water elemental pushing the boat along. They de-summon the water elemental. He's sitting there on this boat screaming incoherently while the ship's being torn apart by ranged attacks. Nothing I could do about it.
Great image, though.
Oh, yeah.
And then they sank the ship.
And I think that goes back to also one of the big things is just being flexible. I mean, when you build a good world, you know what's going on there, so you can make adjustments accordingly. You create villains that know how to challenge the party. And sometimes, based on how the party is built, that means you know which enemies to throw from the book. Sometimes it means you brew something original. And both can work very, very effectively depending on the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, you just follow those. You keep learning from your mistakes, which we have all made plenty of mistakes as DMs. You learn, you get better, and you keep running better and better and more enjoyable games for your players. So, all right, we appreciate you all being here. If you haven't subscribed already, please do, and feel free to check us out on Twitch and Patreon. What are your stories? What are your tips? Was it a custom world that you really remember? Was it a moment where the player screwed up all your plans as DM and it was too funny to not let it happen? Was there a custom enemy that you thought was perfect and then they proved it wasn't? Did your players for some reason choose the cave that says death to all who enter for their new home base instead of the nice little town you designed for them, Braden?
That town had it coming.
We want to hear your stories below, so please leave a like and subscribe. Leave your comments. We love hearing your stories and we'll respond. And thank you again to our special guest for being here.
Certainly.
And as always, good gaming.
See you next time.
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.